everybody, and welcome to part 3 of my loose little series where I'm talking about a little bit more of an advanced topic, which is executive compensation. And in particular, we're talking about how you can link the performance of an executive to their incentive pay. Okay, so how you would set up somebody's compensation in such a way as that it gives the incentives to do the right behaviors and doesn't encourage any of the wrong behaviors. This is something that very few companies do well, and many people have conflicting opinions on how you actually do this in the real world. So I've had some experience with this on both sides of it, and so I find this topic quite fascinating, actually. So let's dive in. Okay, so like I said, linking performance and incentive pay. So more of a basic topic here to start off with. There are 3 components of pay. Okay, base salary, which includes perks, in annual incentive, which is your bonus, which is usually the way companies do bonuses, and long-term incentive pay, which, long-term technically means anything over a year, but in a lot of situations, it manifests itself as stock options or restricted stock or things that are based off stock, okay? So those are your basically 3 components for executives, the 3 primary components. The bulk of goal-based incentive pay is long-term, okay? This is traditionally how it's done. This is how it should be done. And when it comes to the stock market, okay, because the stock market usually enters the discussion because a lot of long-term incentive pay is based off stock, right? And stock price. Okay. The stock market reacts to company performance. Okay. So it's not going to be proactive. Usually it's just reactive. But the stock market's job does not include managing our particular executive's performance. And this is the problem that companies have. This is what a problem they've always had, is that if you're trying to figure out how to compensate a particular executive, the problem is that, you're basing their pay based on how well the company does. And in large organizations, this is problematic. It also is problematic, and all of this is problematic for companies that are not publicly traded. Okay, so that's another big thing too. Now, just a miscellaneous point here, stock options, okay, they're held for around 5 or 6 years, so it's like extra long-term. This means that any original performance context is a distant memory. So this is the problem that we have. If you pay people in terms of stock options, which is the primary component of executive pay, certainly in publicly traded companies, the problem is like you're paying somebody now for something that occurred 5 or 6 years ago. And that's the problem, right? Usually when you make decisions, by the time you see an effect, certainly a long-term effect, that was too long in the past, right? It starts to lose its incentive, right? If you do something now and you know that if you do a great job now, you're going to get a reward in 6 years, that starts to lose some of its appeal, right? So there's an issue with that. Now, going forward into like what we can do here, okay? Compensation committees and boards need to design pay packages that encourage long-term commitment to the organization's well-being. Okay, so this is what they say they do, but in practice, it doesn't always work out that way. Okay, they need to be razor focused on the organization's long-term well-being. And in the past, a lot of scandals have occurred because executives were not caring about this. This was not the focus of their compensation package. They were rewarded for a lot of unsavory short-term behavior rather than the right behaviors in the long term. Okay, what we need are goal-oriented performance objectives. So this is where I'm sort of differing a little bit with a lot of the mainstream thinking. Okay, a lot of the mainstream thinking is basing executive pay off how well the company's doing. Okay, but where I'm sort of going off is, and I'm not alone in this, but I believe it seems like it's a minority opinion, is that we need to base executive pay off goal-oriented performance objectives, okay? So it's not about financial performance objectives necessarily, it's about goal-oriented, okay? Against which performance can be rigorously evaluated. And that's the other key. because anybody can make a goal and say, I need you to produce 20 units, a day, or 20 million units a year, or whatever, the goal is. But I mean, these metrics don't exist in isolation. You could produce 20 million units in a year and all of them don't work. All of them fail quality control, right? You need to rigorously be able to measure these goals, okay? Executive pay should be linked to proper business goals, not just stock price. Okay, so that's basically what I'm saying here. And there's a quote, this is not very original, but there's a quote that comes up: success inoculates against change. I forget off the top of my head who made this quote, but many people have said this sentiment, which is, the more successful you are, the less likely you are to change up what you're doing. Okay, so that can be a trap that people can fall into. Okay, so incentives for senior managers. Okay, this is like senior mid-level managers, is not the C-level. Okay, in my opinion. Now, the executive knows his business, or his or her business. And if we try to micromanage his or her actions through complex schemes of performance objectives, we may simply put him or her in a position to exploit the inevitable loopholes. This is what we see it's very commonplace. We see this over and over again, where, they try and put very complex incentive programs into place. And what the executive will do is, the executive is not stupid. They will be able to figure out the loopholes and how they can, if they need to see certain metric, if your compensation is based off certain metrics, what other behaviors can result in those metrics going in the right direction that are maybe more short-term. This has been the subject of many, many scandals, and I love talking about the Enron scandal in particular, and this is a classic case of this. If all your incentives are based off stock price, all you have to do is go and lie to the public and tell them that, you've made $1 billion that you haven't made, and they'll ooh and they'll ah and they'll go out and buy the stock of your company, right? Which is based on a lie. But then the stock price goes up and you get your bonus, right? So it actually rewards negative behaviors. So this is the issue that we're facing here. Okay. Now here's kind of the challenge, right? Executives are relatively entrepreneurial. And they have a reasonably long-term perspective, 1 to 5 years. Usually, executives are thinking within the 5-year time frame, and that succeeds in incentivizing what they're doing. Okay, for someone at this level, incentive plans are the biggest part of how they get paid. Okay, this is commonplace. So the thing is, it's that entrepreneurial kind of flair. Executives generally have an idea of how they want to get to the goal, and they can divine the path to get to the goal. That's not something that's laid out for them, okay? But it's the results that ultimately matter. Okay, it doesn't matter how you get to the goal for the most part, as long as it's legal and you follow all the rules. As long as you get there, right? That's kind of the critical thing. Now, management's job is to govern the enterprise in such a way as to maximize the wealth of shareholders, right? We know this. That's their job. So incentives should support this change directly. Now, unfortunately, a lot of incentive programs don't. They indirectly support the behaviors, right? They make several assumptions. That you'll go about achieving the goals in the way that the compensation committee has imagined. But the problem is that people end up finding alternative ways to those goals, and some of them are not in the best interests of the organization long term. Okay, incentive plans must create a high degree of line of sight from actions to results to rewards. Okay, this is something I'm saying here, and other people have said this before me. It should be a clear sort of connect the dots between what you do to get what results, to get what rewards. Okay, and a lot of times we don't see this. We see people kind of doing certain things, but then stock price goes up. That could be more of a change in the economy than a change in the company. And then people get their incentive pay. And it's not a clear line of sight between the incentive pay and, what the actions that they did that delivered what results in particular that led to it. That's usually not what we see. Okay. The incentive plans must also take into account how performance is valued by capital markets. Okay. If you're basing things off stock, then obviously you're going to have to take into account what's going on with the stock market. Okay. So you're going to have to look at some financial metrics that are going to take into account, they're going to offset changes in the economy, changes in the stock market, changes in the industry. They're going to have to be able to offset those and be able to isolate what your performance is. You have to think about your performance because that's ultimately what we're rewarding people for. Okay, and this is my last slide here. Now, some other points here. The stock cannot be used effectively as the centerpiece of the incentive structure for many executives. Okay, this is what I'm saying. This is totally against the mold, by the way. A lot of executives, everything is locked off their stock, and in some extreme cases of Fortune 500 CEO pay and stuff, people only get paid really in stock options. They're just sort of concentrating it in that one format. So I say that that's not the best way to go. Okay. Now, the argument has been put forward that you can do that if the CEO is long-term. Okay. In the case of organizations where the CEO is the founder, so they're likely not going anywhere fast. Okay. But I just still find that kind of flimsy. Okay. And the reason why I'm not a big fan of this is because the number one reason is what I already stated, is that, if you want your stock price to go up, you could make a whole bunch of public promises, make a bunch of announcements, and just give the perception of things being hunky-dory. So the stock price goes up and you hit your metrics that trigger a bunch of executive pay. And, it's not based on anything real. Afterwards, you fail to deliver, you renege on a lot of your commitments and a lot of your promises, and then the stock price correspondingly goes down, but nobody cares at that point because bonuses have been paid out. So this is an issue. And we see executives sort of exhibiting this behavior. Goal-based pay should be based on sustained results of operations with little effect from non-operational matters like financing policy. Okay. This is the challenge. It's being able to isolate your operational performance, right? Now, this is going to use multiple metrics. Okay. And this is for the compensation committee to be prescient enough to be able to anticipate. They have to be able to say, look, we're going for this kind of performance. And usually a lot of these will be based on, if you look at your balanced scorecard, it's going to be based on the customer sort of classification. You're going to be looking at sales. You're going to be looking at customer satisfaction. You're going to be looking at things like warranty claims and, returns and, this kind of thing. You're going to be looking at a series of those metrics, okay, within a long-term time frame. And that's going to inform you of how good the executive is doing now, or how well they're doing, I should say. Now, the thing is, this is where also your executive pay is directly having an effect on your organizational structure. If you are have a departmentation where you've divided your company into, say, products, and you have product divisions, this makes it a lot easier to measure, right? If your departmentation is by function, if you've got an accounting division and a sales division and an operations division, that makes it very, very hard to do this. So it does require you to look at how your company is structured. Okay. Business conditions are often volatile. We know this. Incentives must be adaptable. This is something that a lot of compensation committees don't seem to take into account that much, at least not as well as they should. This is a big issue because, look at the last couple of years. Look at what happened in 2020, 2021. Things are volatile as hell and things change, and if you haven't built all that stuff in to things like your compensation policy, it's not going to work. It's going to reward the wrong types of behaviors. It's going to lead some great talented people to leave the company because the metrics that they would have to hit to get the pay that they were expecting are unachievable, under certain conditions, if things change or the economy tanks or something like that. So you got to be able to reward stuff like this. Companies should not attempt to use incentives as a substitute for business strategy or as a tool of micromanagement. This is commonly how they're used. It's very convenient for the CEO and the compensation committee to basically just not have to worry about leading strategy because they feel that, well, I'm just making all of my executives essentially entrepreneurs, and I'm shifting the thinking work onto them. They'll have to figure out what the way forward is. I don't have to do it. And that's how we're rewarding them. That's not exactly a great policy either. A number one rule in business is you should never farm out your strategy. I mean, if you farm that out, you have no organization. You can externalize pretty much everything you do and farm it out, but you shouldn't farm out strategy. If without that, you're no longer an organization. You're no longer a company. You're no longer the master of your own fate, put it that way. Okay. So, and a tool of micromanagement, that's true. This doesn't substitute, it's not a substitute for oversight. You need that human element of having the approval of your superior. They have to believe that, and they have to be able to back you up as an executive that you're doing the right thing, and they're satisfied with your goals, your plan, and how your execution is going to go. If you don't have that, you can't, like this is not a substitute for it. The compensation should not be a substitute for having that oversight. So that's what I was going to say in this episode. So hopefully that makes sense. Once again, this is a complicated topic, but I think it's quite interesting. It's like, these are some really tough real world problems of how you do this. Essentially the bottom line is if you hire someone and put them in charge of your baby, a pretty important operation that you need to deliver the goods, how do you ensure that they're doing the right thing? Just because they're doing something that you wouldn't do, does that mean that they're not doing as good of a job? And as we all know, long-term success is much more important than short-term. So if they're not achieving any short-term success or even mid-term success, does that mean they're doing a bad job? These are the real tough questions we have to ask, and it really comes down with everything we know about compensation and about finance and economics and all this kind of stuff that comes into play here. Really, at the end of the day, it boils down to HR. It boils down to the sort of behavioral approach to HR. And do you agree with your subordinates? At the end of the day, that's the only way to do it. I don't think there is a way to take the human element out of the equation, even in publicly traded companies, and just try and come up with some compensation system that will judge whether a person is doing a good job and reward them. You still need that human element at the end. So anyway, we will explore more in the next episode. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for watching this long. I know this is a bit dry, but this is, in my opinion, where it's at when it comes to a lot of advanced HR issues. So thank you very much. You guys are awesome. I'll see you on the next video. Take care.